Hi, welcome to my Parsha shiur. Today we're going to talk about Parshat Noach. Thank you so much to my dear friends Jean and Jerry Friedman for sponsoring this shiur in memory of Jean's mother, Goldie Cohen, Golda Bas Zorach V'Esther Aleha Shalom, whose yahrzeit was on the 17th of Elul. Her neshama should have an aliyah. We should all be zeicha to see Tchias HaMesim. Now, imagine a world where everyone speaks the same language, exactly the same language. It's a world where ideas flow effortlessly and everyone is bound by a common purpose. Well, guess what? Such a world once existed. At the beginning of history, everyone spoke the same language. It was a time of unity. Humanity didn't just share words, they shared ambitions, striving together in ways we can hardly fathom today. As they journeyed across the vast, uncharted lands, as time unfolded, they began to share a vision. And that vision was a desire to build something monumental, something that would leave a lasting mark on history. In their collective hearts grew the idea of a tower, one that would scrape the skies and proclaim their strength and unity to the world. Doesn't sound like such a bad idea, right? Well, here's what the Torah has to say about it. I'm going to paraphrase the psukim. Once upon a time, the entire world spoke a single language, with people united by both words and purpose. As they migrated eastward, they stumbled upon a fertile valley in the land of Shinar and decided to settle there. The people felt a stirring desire for greatness and a sense of unity in their newfound home, so they began planning an ambitious project. Someone suggested, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly. And so they did. These bricks became their building blocks, stronger and more versatile than simple stones and rocks. And they used tar as mortar to bind everything together. Fueled by a common goal, they proposed, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches up to the heavens. This way we'll make a name for ourselves and ensure we're not scattered all over the world. Their intentions were clear. They sought permanence, a place of unity and strength, something lasting to keep them all together. So far, so good. But actually, not so good. Because while the people of Shinar were busy building, God took note of their efforts. He descended to observe the city and the tower that they were constructing. God recognized that with a shared language and purpose, nothing would stop them from pursuing any goal they imagined. And so God decided to intervene. He said, let's go down and mix up their language so they won't understand each other's speech. And just like that, the people of Shinar found themselves speaking in confusing tongues, each language unique, leaving them unable to communicate with each other as they had before. The grand project halted as misunderstandings piled up. The people scattered across the earth, abandoning the half-built city and its tower. The place became known as Babel, because it was there that God had babbled or confused their speech, sending them out to populate the rest of the world. That's the story. It's in the Torah at the end of Parshat Noach. Quite a strange story, I think you'll agree. What is it all about? Why does the Torah include this story, and what message is it meant to convey to us thousands of years later? According to Rashi, based on the teachings of Chazal, this story is about nothing less than a rebellion against God. Let's explore what he means. Rashi explains that they all spoke Safar Achas. This means they all spoke Lashon HaKodesh, the holy language, Hebrew. And they spoke Devarim Achadim, says Rashi, which means that they came together with a single purpose. And what was that purpose? Simple. They said, who is God to reserve the heavens for himself? Let us ascend to the heavens and wage war with him. In one interpretation of their intentions, says Rashi, they rebelled against the concept of one God, the unique creator of all existence. And in another explanation, another interpretation, they reasoned once every 1656 years, the heavens become unstable, as they did during the flood. Let's build supports, columns, to hold up the heavens and prevent another catastrophe. Rashi's interpretation paints a vivid picture of humanity's hubris and fear as they attempt to assert control over the heavens and to challenge God's sovereignty. The lesson from this story is about the pitfalls of human pride and the dangers of forgetting our place in the universe. God thwarted their plans of this early attempt at rebellion against him, demonstrating for all time that rebelling against God, in the end, is always futile. The Midrash Rabbah gives us a fascinating, more detailed look into what was really going on with the generation of the Tower of Babel, adding depth and detail to Rashi's explanation. According to Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, when it says Safa Achat, and Dvarim Achadim, one language and unified words, it doesn't mean to convey that this was a friendly collaboration between a bunch of people looking to do good stuff. On the contrary, it was a shared purpose in defiance of God. They weren't just building a city and a tower, they were making a pointed statement against both God and Avraham Avinu, says the Midrash. In their arrogance, they mocked Avraham, calling him a barren mule, someone who would never leave a legacy. They thought his faith in an unseeable and an unknowable God was irrelevant, that he was an outlier and a nutcase. And as for God, they weren't willing to accept that the heavens belonged only to him. They thought, why should he get the heavens and we only get the earth? Let's build a tower that reaches up to the heavens, put an idol holding a sword at the top, and make it look like we are ready to go to battle against God, against him. To be clear, it wasn't just rebellion for rebellion's sake. The Midrash also mentions this superstitious belief that underscored their actions. Rashi also mentions it. They believe that once every 1,656 years, the heavens themselves became unstable, just like they thought had happened in the time of the flood. Why not build a few supports to hold up the heavens, they said. We'll place a tower in each direction, north, south, west and east, here in the east. That would solve the problem. So here they were, united by a vision of self-sufficiency and by fear and ego, convinced they could defy or even overpower God. The Midrash paints an intense picture of human pride, showing us the dangers of forgetting our limitations and overestimating our own control in the face of divine order. The Talmud in Sanhedrin Daf Kuftes brings another fascinating angle to the story, suggesting that what was at the root of the whole Tower of Babel project was idolatry, paganism. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Elazar explains that the people who built the tower were divided into three groups, each with its own plan for what they would do up in the heavens when they got there. The first group thought, let's build this tower and move up there. We'll make a permanent home in the sky. The second group had a different idea. We'll go up, but not just to live. We're going to set up a new center for idol worship right up there. And the third group took it even further, saying, we're building this tower to challenge God himself. We'll go up and wage war against God. Rabbi Nosson, however, cuts through these nuances with his own take. In the end, they all wanted the same thing, to establish a place for idol worship. Whether they talked about settling, idol worship, or even waging war, each approach was really about shifting their allegiance away from God and replacing him with something that they could control and manipulate, namely idols, idolatry, paganism. In other words, their real aim wasn't just independence or self-importance. They were actually seeking a way to push God out of the picture entirely, putting idols, creations of their own making, in his place. The Talmud shows us how deeply ingrained The drive to control and reshape reality can be, especially when people want to create gods that suit their own desires. But Abarbanel, the great Spanish commentator who was exiled in 1492 and settled in Italy, where he wrote his Midrash, he looks at this story quite differently. With his sharp analytical approach, he isn't satisfied with any of the traditional Chazal-based interpretations of the Tower of Babel story. He finds each one of them problematic. First, Abarbanel dismisses the idea that they intended to ascend to the heavens and wage war against God. He finds it utterly unrealistic that everyone, the entire generation, would agree to something so absurd. Among them were wise and righteous people like Noach, like Shem, like Aver, and even Avraham, all of whom were known for their wisdom. It's simply not believable, says Abarbanel, that they would go along with such an irrational idea. And if somehow the entire population were that foolish, Abarbanel argues that they wouldn't have deserved any punishment. It would make much more sense for God to just laugh at their foolishness. Let them do whatever they want. Abarbanel then critiques the view that they were engaged in outright heresy or denial of God. If that were the case, he argues, then a fitting punishment would have been something much more severe, like fire and brimstone, like what happened in Sodom. Not just confusing their language and scattering them. Such a light punishment seems to fall far short of the gravity of the sin of heresy. Finally, Abarbanel addresses the idea that they were building the tower as a precaution against another flood. This interpretation is also implausible, he says. The people knew that Noach and his sons, the leaders of their generation, had a covenant from God promising that the waters of a flood would never again cover the earth. Given this promise, the fear of another flood would have been completely unfounded. Why would they build a massive tower out of fear when they had a divine oath of protection? Abarbanel's critique brings us right back to the drawing board. What is going on with this strange story? We clearly need to look deeper into it to find a more rational and satisfying explanation. By the way, Ibn Ezra offers a different and thought-provoking take on the Tower of Babel story. But as we'll see, Abarbanel doesn't like it either. According to Ibn Ezra, the dispersion of the people wasn't really a punishment at all. Instead, he sees it as a natural outcome, a consequence that simply countered their own plans. The people wanted to stay united, all gathered in one place, building a city and a tower to solidify their unity. But God had a different purpose in mind for humanity. He wanted them to spread out and inhabit the entire earth, just as he had commanded after the flood. According to Ibn Ezra, the people of Babel simply didn't understand God's larger plan. The strategy was lost on them. All politics is local politics. They thought unity and centralization were the keys to greatness, but God knew that true progress would come only when they spread out and diversified, with each group developing its own unique strengths and perspectives. The dispersion wasn't about punishment, it was about setting them on the path intended for humanity, even if they hadn't accepted it. But, as I mentioned, Abarbanel even finds Ibn Ezra's explanation problematic. He points out that from the time humanity left the ark, people had been living together in one society, but God hadn't seen the need at that point to separate or disperse them, only when they began building the city and the tower. If God's sole intention was for humanity to eventually spread out and populate the earth, this could have happened naturally, over time, as the population grew. As the numbers of people increased, they would naturally move outwards, settling in all directions, west, east, north, and south, without any need for divine intervention or the dramatic confusion of language. Ibn Ezra's interpretation fails to explain why there was a need for such a drastic measure. If a natural dispersion was God's intent, there would have been no need for the entire episode with the tower, and no need for such a disruption. The dramatic shift and confusion seemed too intense, enforced diversity seems harsh and overly prescriptive, and so Abarbanel dismisses Ibn Ezra's explanation. The Ran offers a unique perspective on the Tower of Babel story, interpreting it as a cautionary tale about centralization and unchecked power. He explains that the people of that generation were determined to unify under one leader, one government, and one nation. They wanted absolute unity, with everyone bound under a single authority. To symbolize this, they agreed to build a tower of immense height, its top reaching the heavens. This wasn't just a building, it was meant to project awe and fear, towering over everything as a reminder of centralized power, visible from afar and intimidating everyone who saw it. According to the Ran, the issue wasn't a sin in the conventional sense. At that moment when they were building the tower, they hadn't done anything in particular wrong. But God, with his foresight, obviously, saw the dangers of this setup. A single authority with absolute power. History has shown that when corrupt people gather under one rule, it can lead to tyranny, oppression, and the erosion of freedom. So, even though no evil had yet emerged, God knew the potential harm such a society could bring to humanity in the future, which is why he dispersed them, preventing what would have been a disaster for the world. The Haamek Davar offers another idea, a compelling explanation of the sin of the Tower of Babel generation, highlighting the dangers of enforced ideological uniformity. According to him, their crime lay in creating a society that imposed one single ideology on everyone, with no room for dissent. They controlled the population by instilling fear, compelling everyone to adopt a unified belief system. Anyone who refused to conform was punished, sometimes even with death, like Avraham Avinu, who the Midrash describes as being thrown into a fiery furnace by Nimrod, the king, just because he refused to accept their beliefs. The fear wasn't just about people leaving to settle elsewhere. It was about keeping everyone ideologically on the same page. They worried that if anyone ventured beyond their controlled environment, they might develop alternative viewpoints. That was the reason they maintained a strict watch over their society, ensuring that no one deviated from Dvarim Achodim, the unified words that held them together. Those who dared to think differently were seen as a threat to the ideological unity and were dealt with harshly. The Haamek Davar suggests that this oppressive unity was the real evil. God does not want a world where diversity of thought is crushed. Instead, God values a society that allows for different beliefs and perspectives. By scattering the people, God was counteracting the oppressive conformity, ensuring a world in which individual thought and freedom could flourish. A Hasidic perspective on the Tower of Babel explores the deeper spiritual motivations behind the story, focusing on humanity's relationship with God and the inner mystical dimensions of unity and diversity. The Kedushas Levi sees the generation of the tower not as arrogant rebels, which is a negative perspective, but as seekers, people who wanted to reach heaven, to bridge the gap between the physical and spiritual worlds. Their desire to build a tower with its top in the heavens reflects a genuine longing to draw closer to divine realms. However, their mistake lay in the means that they chose. Instead of each person cultivating their unique path to spirituality, they attempted to reach God through rigid, uniform methods. They believed that only by uniting in a single structured approach could they access the divine. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, Kedushas Levi, explains that unity does not require uniformity. In fact, God created a world of diversity because each soul connects to the divine in its own way. Just as each person has their own strengths, insights, and personality, every person's approach to God is unique. The generation of the tower missed this essential truth. They attempted to impose one approach for all, ignoring the beautiful diversity God intended. God's response to the tower was to remind humanity of this fundamental lesson by dispersing them and diversifying their languages. Through the dispersion, God demonstrated that true closeness to him is achieved not by everyone following a single path, but by each soul expressing its own unique connection to holiness. This beautiful perspective of the Kedushas Levi teaches us that while unity is a holy goal, it must be an organic unity that celebrates individual pathways rather than suppresses them. Shadal, Rav Shmuel David Lutzato, offers a more grounded, historical interpretation of the Tower of Babel story, focusing on the socio-political aspects rather than theological or mystical meanings. According to Shadal, the Tower story reflects an early attempt at establishing a unified empire, a centralized authority that would wield control over all of humanity, essentially creating a totalitarian regime. Shadal interprets the building of the tower as a symbol of centralizing power and authority. The people wanted to establish a capital city with a monumental structure that would unify everyone under one rule. They feared that if people spread out, they would lose control, so they strove to concentrate their power and prevent dispersion. The tower, reaching up to the heavens, was a display of human might and dominion, an effort to impose a singular order and prevent the natural diversity and independence that comes with dispersed communities. Shadal views God's intervention, confusing their language and dispersing them, as a way to ensure humanity's freedom and diversity. He suggests that this intervention wasn't punitive, but rather protective, preventing humanity from falling under a single oppressive rule. By creating linguistic and cultural differences, God safeguarded the autonomy of different groups, allowing them to develop their own identities and preventing the establishment of a tyrannical empire. And finally, let's look at the Dubno Maggid, Rav Yaakov Kranz. He offers a parable that sheds light on the underlying issues of the tower narrative. Here is the parable. A group of villagers decided to build a massive tower in the center of their town, aiming to create a landmark that would bring them fame and fortune. They invested all their resources and efforts into this project, believing it would make their village renowned and that would be a great thing for them. But because they were so obsessed with the tower, they neglected their fields, their homes, and their daily responsibilities. The villagers' economy began to crumble, relationships were strained, and the fabric of their society was weakened. It was the cause of their doom. The Dubno Maggid explains that the villagers' mistake was not in their desire to build something grand, but in their misplaced priorities. By focusing solely on the tower, they ignored the essential aspects of their lives that truly sustained them. Similarly, the generation of the Tower of Babel sought to create a monumental structure to make a name for themselves and to prevent dispersion. But in doing so, they neglected their primary purpose, to spread across the earth, cultivate it, and fulfill God's directives, these are the basic needs that they needed as a foundation for their success. Their tower building project was based on a superficial and ultimately pointless goal, and God, giving them different languages, saved them from themselves and from their terrible plan. And so, as we can see, the story of the Tower of Babel is far more than just a tale of humanity trying to build a tall tower. It's a complex narrative that speaks to the dangers of pride, the risks of uniformity, and the value of diversity. Whether we look at it through the lens of Rashi, Midrash, Ibn Ezra, the Haamek Davar, the Ran, the Kedushas Levi, or Shadal's historical perspective, or the Dubno Maggid's brilliant parable, each interpretation reminds us that true greatness lies not in our ability to unify for grand projects that defy God's will, but in our willingness to embrace the unique paths and purposes that God has set up for each and every one of us. The reason this story is in the Torah is so that we learn from the mistakes of the Tower of Babel generation and instead work to build a world of unity that celebrates diversity, and a world where each person's connection to God and to others brings blessings and peace, whatever language they speak and wherever they may live across the globe. We'll leave it here for today. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you. Thank you.